It was the kind of tragedy that rocked a small, tight-knit community to its core. On September 6, 1982, a shocking act of violence took the lives of 8 people aboard the fishing vessel Investor in the remote Alaskan village of Craig. Among the young victims were the ambitious young skipper, Mark Coulthurst, his pregnant wife Irene, and their 2 young children, Kimberly and John, ages 5 and 4. Also killed were 4 young teenage deckhands, Chris Heyman, Jerome Keown, Dean Moon, and Mike Stewart, who was Mark's cousin. The Coulthursts were a loving family based out of Blaine, Washington. Mark, at just 28 years old, had recently become the proud owner of the brand new $850,000 Investor, one of the most expensive and technologically advanced fishing boats in the region at the time. He was a hard worker who inspired immense respect and admiration from his crew. The family was in Craig for the final days of the commercial fishing season, having arrived on September 5th. In what turned out to be a cruel twist of fate, they had attended a birthday party for Mark at a local restaurant that evening, a celebration of his 28 years and the bright future that seemed to lie ahead of him and his young family. Little did they know that only hours later, a nightmare would unfold aboard their boat. Sometime after the Coulthursts returned to the Investor, around 9:30 p.m., as a storm raged, a killer crept aboard in the darkness. Using either a .22 caliber pistol or rifle, he opened fire on the 8 victims, methodically executing them. It is believed several may have been shot while asleep in their bunks. The crime scene was indisputably gruesome. A family massacred along with 4 teenagers just starting out in life. But bizarrely, the killer's night of horror was not over. In the eerie pre-dawn hours, he started up the engine of the 58-foot Investor and motored it about a mile out, waving nonchalantly to a nearby skipper despite his grisly cargo below deck. His actions over the next day and a half were equally brazen and chilling. After anchoring near Fish Egg Island, the killer returned to town at some point that day or evening, remaining in Craig overnight. Then, around midday on September 8th, he calmly motored back out to the Investor in the boat's skiff. Dousing the craft with gasoline, he set it afire, the flames rapidly engulfing the ship and most of the bodies inside, in a scene likened to a crematorium. Even as the boat burned, the killer exhibited an astonishing sang-froid. Witnesses reported seeing him pilot the skiff back towards town, even offering the small boat to onlookers as if nothing was amiss. To those who saw him, he came across as a cool character, recounts Craig's mayor, Lee Axemaker. The unknown man was described as a white male in his early 20s, with a pock-marked complexion, wearing glasses. As dusk fell, he slipped away, disappearing as mysteriously as he had arrived. When the fire was finally extinguished 2 days later, investigators were left with a nightmarish scene and very few clues. Most of the physical evidence had gone up in flames aboard the nearly destroyed Investor. In a grim task, they painstakingly sifted through 2 tons of ashes, recovering just 10 pounds of bone fragments and a single tooth from the 8 victims. For 2 long years, law enforcement in Alaska and Washington followed any lead they could, interviewing everyone who had been in Craig around the time of the murders. A list of some 150 people from the fishing fleet that was docked in the harbor that fateful night, but they struggled to establish a motive for the massacre. Robbery was ruled out, as boats seldom carried substantial cash. The prevailing drug trafficking theory never panned out either. Eventually, police landed on a prime suspect, John Peel, a 24-year-old boatyard worker from Bellingham, Washington, who had worked on a previous vessel owned by Mark Coulthurst. In 1984, Peel was arrested and charged, with prosecutors alleging he committed the murders out of personal grudge against his former skipper. Peel's sensational trial in 1986 lasted an incredible 6 months. Much of the case rested on questionable circumstantial evidence and witness identifications placing the young man near the Investor around the time of the killings. In the end, the jury couldn't reach a verdict, resulting in a hung jury. A second trial in 1988 ended in full acquittal for Peel, after the defense raised heightened doubt about the testimony that visually implicated him. He later filed a wrongful prosecution suit against the state and was awarded a $900,000 settlement. In the years since, a cloud of unanswered questions has hung over the Investor Massacre and the people of Blaine and Craig. For some, like the victims' families, the pain is still raw decades later. While authorities insist the Peel investigation was solid, others disagree that he was ever truly the culprit. For his part, Peel himself remains adamant about his non-involvement, while acknowledging the tragedy that took place. So what really happened aboard the Investor that fateful September night in 1982? As the years roll by, a number of theories have emerged. Some locals in the tiny fishing village of Craig have long insisted the Investor was being used for drug trafficking, possibly as a mobile storage depot of sorts. Gossip and word on the street in the close-knit community that the boat always had the best drugs. But others who investigate the case are highly skeptical of these assertions. For one, the Investor was an absolute newcomer to Alaskan waters in 1982, with no prior history in the region under previous owners. Her crew, under Mark Coulthurst, were also new recruits that season, with one or two exceptions. Did they really have enough of a foothold to be operating a large-scale drug-running operation from day one? Perhaps most importantly, the subsequent investigation by law enforcement turned up no evidence of narcotics being transported or sold by anyone aboard the Investor. The word on the street gossip seems to have been just that, unsubstantiated barroom talk. In the weeks after the murders, police developed a theory that someone aboard the boat that night had committed the massacre, possibly in a fit of rage, before trying to cover it up by burning the Investor. This lined up with certain behavioral profiles. The so-called disgruntled employee archetype. A fishing vessel does function as a workplace after all, with a strict hierarchy. The investigation keyed in on John Peel, a 24-year-old former deckhand who had worked under Mark Coulthurst the previous season. Peel had parted ways with the previous vessel prior to the Investor purchase after that stint, and was struggling through a lackluster season in 1982 on another boat. To investigators, Peel fit the profile of the disgruntled ex-employee who snaps. Perhaps he had been fired or treated unfairly by Coulthurst, the theory went, and had harbored lingering resentment. With the Investor newly docked in Craig, Peel may have seen an opportunity to get his revenge. The case against Peel was entirely circumstantial. Several witnesses placed a man matching his description near the Investor around the time of the murders. The pockmarked complexion, glasses, and estimated age and build all seem to implicate the young deckhand. In a controversial move, Peel was arrested in 1984 and brought to trial 2 years later. Prosecutors alleged he killed out of spite towards his former employer, perhaps intending to just go after Coulthurst at first before opening fire on anyone else on board. The fact that Peel later tried to burn the vessel suggested an attempt to cover his tracks. The 6-month trial in 1986 resulted in a hung jury, as reasonable doubt persisted over the identification evidence used to tie Peel to the scene. A 1988 retrial ended in a full acquittal, and Peel later received a $900,000 settlement from the state after alleging malicious prosecution. While some investigators stand by the notion that Peel was the right suspect even after his acquittal, serious doubts remain over his involvement as well. There was no substantial motive established beyond Peel's prior employment relationship with Coulthurst. Another theory raised speculates that the killer didn't actually intend to massacre the Coulthurst family at all. Rather, he mistakenly targeted the wrong boat while meaning to go after someone else entirely. While the Investor crew were all single young men, Mark Coulthurst's family circumstances raised the possibility of a domestic impetus for the killings, however remote it might seem on the surface. In this scenario, the trigger came from within Mark and Irene's marriage itself. Was there any secret turmoil, resentments, or stressors that could have bubbled over into an unthinkable act of violence? An unwanted pregnancy contributing to resentment, for instance. A financial situation going off the rails between the married couple. Such theories can certainly approach the offensive, as they cast aspersions on the victims themselves to a degree, but it's also a hypothetical. that can't be entirely discounted when so little is truly known about the Coulthurst's personal lives in 1982. While most theories attempt to construct a motive for why the investor was targeted, another perspective is that the killings were a product of a tragic case of mistaken identity. Under this premise, the massacre's perpetrator intended to kill someone else entirely, but confused the investor with their actual desired target. However, proponents point to a few key details that they believe lend the mistaken identity theory some credibility. For one, the investor was a total newcomer to Alaskan waters in the Craig fishing grounds in 1982. The $850,000 vessel and her crew were in their inaugural season, working this region after being based in Washington state. They lacked any extensive feuds, conflicts, or ties to the area that could explicitly make them targets. What's more, the sleek, newly constructed investor fully earned her reputation as the Cadillac of fishing boats docked in rugged Craig that year. Her luxurious amenities and state-of-the-art design made her stand out drastically from the older, more weather-beaten fishing vessels surrounding her at the docks. At night, in the dark, could she have been confused for another boat entirely? Adding to the intrigue is the fact that the killer tried extensively to sink then destroy the investor after the murders, even returning a day later to burn the ship in an obvious attempt to eliminate evidence. This suggests a degree of premeditation and preparation, as if they had specifically intended to hit a target, just potentially the wrong one. Additionally, while the investor was new to the region, it was far from the only Seattle-based crew fishing in Alaskan waters that season. If geographic familiarity was a prerequisite for the killer's choice of prey, logic follows that other boats from the same port city could have been more obvious targets than an outright newcomer. In the 4 decades since the tragedy, the Investor Massacre has remained one of Alaska's most inscrutable and notorious unsolved cases. Despite the full-court efforts of law enforcement over years of investigation, including 2 trials against their primary suspect, John Peel, which both failed to secure convictions, a motive and a culprit both continue to persistently elude identification.